2020. It's good to start a new year, and I don't know about you, but it's always one of those things of being able to have that fresh start. You look forward to New Year's for fresh starts? I certainly do. And I think one of the reasons why we've chosen this year to have renewal as the focus might be a little self-serving, I suppose, because I know how much I need renewal. I know how much I tend to get to the end of the day or the end of a week, and I just think, I don't have what it takes to take me any further. Let me get this out of the wind view here. And so, in a sense, renewal, this initiative, this theme that we'd like to have for 2020 is a bit self-serving for us as a staff, for me as a pastor, but I believe that renewal is built in to the Christian life. That we come to the end of the day, we come to the end of the week, we come to the end of the year, and we feel depleted, we feel empty, because it's built in to the design that God has created us to experience. And He's done that for a purpose so that we come for refreshment. We come for renewal. We desire, our lives demand that there is something that helps fill us back up. And so we wanted to spend this year to help understand and lay the groundwork for what does that kind of renewal look like. What does that kind of refreshment involve? And what is the residual impact? How does it send the shock waves into your community, into your family, into your workplace? How does it change the world around you? Because once we really get hold of this truth, everything will change about your life. You wake up with a new sense of renewed focus, energizing spirit of the Holy Spirit that carries you into the day, and a fresh, energizing sense that God is going to accomplish something great. Despite the brokenness of your life and the frailty that you might feel, the pressure of your circumstances, and the obstacles that might be in your way, there can be renewal for you today, and there can be renewal for you this year. And it is my prayer for my life and my prayer for this church that God helps us not only to know what renewal is, but to get in the flow of this cycle that God has designed us to enjoy so that we can wake up tomorrow stronger than we were today. And it can happen regardless of how you are breaking down physically and even how you're feeling spiritually, the pressure that is on your life. You can wake up tomorrow renewed. That's what I want for me, and that's what I want for you. And when that is true, it will begin to absolutely change, radically transform your world and your life. Well, 2020 was a year of firsts. And one of those firsts that happened this year was the first time the marathon record, the 2-hour marathon record, was broken. And it was broken by this guy, and I'm going to butcher his name. He's a Kenyan runner. His name is Eliud Kipchoge. That's my attempt. You can see the time there, 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 40 seconds. That is unprecedented. Running at a clip of 4 minute and 32-second miles. Mile after mile after mile after mile. Now, I don't know if any of you have run cross country or any of you have run track and field, but just to give you some concept of what this means, that is a 2-minute and 17-second 800. 800 after 800 after 800 after 800, mile after mile after mile. That is unbelievable. I have never run a 4-minute mile in my life. I have never run a 2-minute and 17-second half mile in my life. I'm lucky to be able to run a 15-second 100 meters, okay? And when I ran cross country, I was really elated when in the 2-mile I was able to break the 6-minute marker. But he's doing that 4 minutes and 32 seconds, mile after mile after mile. Now, again, to give you some context, the marathon, the official marathon really began back in 1890-something, 1897, I think it was. It was the Boston Marathon, and it was at that point where it became a regular thing. Now, in the first Boston Marathon, the record-breaking time at that point was 3 hours and 25 minutes and 55 seconds. That is a whole hour and 25 minutes later than this man, Eliud, finished this race. And the Olympics, which began in 1896, the first mile was run in 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and he would have beat him every single mile for 26. It wasn't until 1954 that finally the mile was run in less than 4 minutes. Okay? So he's keeping up with the record-setting mile for the next 50 years, and still the mile now is only run in about 3 minutes and 40 seconds, I think, was the record for this past year, the Olympic record. It's unbelievable to think about. Now, any first-place finisher of a mile who is able to do it now in sub-4-minute miles is not going to be able to keep that up. Matter of fact, even if he had 24 hours in between each race, he would be hard-pressed to be able to do that for 26 days in a row. But here Eliud was able to accomplish this feat. It was unprecedented. Now, those who are part of the racing community would know that this wasn't really an official marathon. He had a lot of things going for him. First of all, he had a group of 7 guys who were rotating in, and we can see this next picture. Essentially, they were the windbreak, okay? So he's running behind these 7 guys. I think they ran for a couple of miles at a time before they had to give up, and the next group of 7 had to come in, and he was following in their trail to make sure that he was able to break this record. And not only that, but they were running behind a pace car that it's kind of hard to see, but can you see the line there on the road? That is the sub-2-hour line that they have to follow in order to make sure they break this record, okay? Plus, he had these Nike shoes that weren't even on the market yet and were probably providing a little extra spring to his step. But I mean, come on, even with all those things, I could have been pulled behind a skateboard and still not make it in 2 hours. I mean, let's be honest, that is unbelievable. I think about renewal, and I could probably be renewed for 24 hours and run 100 meters for the next year and still not be able to break this record. But that's what we want for us as you as a church. We want you every morning to be able to wake up with a sense of refreshment, this awakening, this rebirth that we can experience as God's people. And so for the next 3 weeks, today and the next couple of weeks after this, I want to press in to this rebirth, this renewal that God has offered to us as believers. And I want us just today to begin to understand what that renewal means. I want to develop this definition of renewal. What does renewal mean, and how do we get it? And I want to just lead us through some questions. That's what this outline is about. It's not making statements, propositional statements, as much as help leading us through the process of understanding what does renewal mean, what does renewal do, who is renewal for, how do I get this renewal, and how do I maintain or sustain this renewal in my life? And what does it actually mean? And then next week we're going to begin to kind of layer in the same passage as the Scripture. We're going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and chapter 4. I think it's on page 966 in your Pew Bible. We're going to be layering in some new things. What does this mean for you as an individual? How does this begin to spill out on the world around you? How does it affect the people that you go to church with? How does it affect your family? And then how does it begin to affect and impact and transform the world in which you live? So we're going to be doing that over the next couple of weeks. I'm reminded of the verse in Isaiah chapter 40, 28 to 31. It says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard the Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth? He does not faint or grow weary." That's your God. "His understanding is unsearchable. He gives," listen to this, "power to the faint. And to him who has no might, he increases strength." You want some of that this morning? "Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted, but those who wait for the Lord shall renew," there's your word, "shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall walk and not be weary. They shall run and not faint." That's the kind of renewal we're talking about. And I want to develop this for us in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and 4. We're going to go to the end of chapter 4. We're going to make our way up through to chapter 3. We're kind of reach into those verses so that we can kind of get a fuller perspective of what renewal means and develop this definition so we can work off this definition not only today but for the rest of the year. And then once we get through January, we're going to use the book of Nehemiah, which is a companion to Ezra. They kind of go together, Ezra and Nehemiah. We're going to finish that study, and we're going to be able to see this morning how God uses renewal in the life of Nehemiah to absolutely change everything about the situation in Jerusalem. It is unbelievable. And the more I think about this hero, Nehemiah, this unsung hero, the more I'm encouraged to know that God can accomplish in us, through His Spirit and through renewal, the things that we see not only in the Apostle Paul, but we see in the life of Nehemiah. This essentially anonymous individual who was a cupbearer in Babylon before God sent him to Jerusalem to do this renewing work there among the people of Israel. So if you're there with me in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, let me just begin with verse 16. It says, "Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day." I want to begin to look at renewal, and what kind of renewal are we talking about? Okay, so we're not going to be going deep today. We're going to be going broad so we can, again, begin to develop this definition of what does renewal mean. We'll be going deep next week. First, I want you to see that renewal is a renewal that happens inside of you. It's a renewal of your inner self. We see that though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. The outer self is what you see. The outer self is what you can touch and feel. The outer self is the physical parts of life. It is the part that you can interact with. Paul says as much in verse 18. Drop down just a couple of verses. He says, "As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen, For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. So he's contrasting here the things that are outside, outward, that you can see, that are visible, that are physical, with the things that are inside, the things you can't touch, you can't feel, and that's where renewal really begins to take shape. Now, it eventually affects the things that are outside as well, but it starts within. Just a few verses earlier, Paul describes the trials and tribulations of life that confront him in verse 10. Look at that with me for a second. He says, always carrying about in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. Here, Paul, again, is contrasting the physical and the spiritual. He wants us to know that just because our lives are broken in many ways, and we feel that, don't we? Don't you feel the brokenness of your life? The aging, the limitations, the corruption of sin, the ignorance that you feel at times, frustration, exhaustion, discouragement, disappointment. One of my kids this week, over the Christmas season reminded me on at least a couple of occasions how my physical life is beginning to deteriorate. Thank you very much. In the same day, this child who remained nameless said to me, "Daddy, you're getting really old." And then said, I had to use my glasses to repair, I forget what it was. My memory's going too. It was something important I was fixing. And I couldn't see, so she brought, "Daddy, you're going blind." Yeah, I'm going blind. And you could add to that, my hearing is going as well. So I'm totally being transformed on the outside in a way that is demonstrating the deterioration of this life. But in spite of it all, we can experience renewal. You can experience inner renewal today. Notice how he says this. He says, you can be renewed day by day. Now, that is really good news. That's really good news because it is a present renewal. It is a kind of renewal that you can access at any moment. You don't have to lean on yesterday's life or energy. You can get filled up today. That is what is accessible to you through the renewal that God offers you through His Holy Spirit. So that at the end of each day, you are more alive than you were the day before. You know, the New Testament uses 4 different words and 6 verses to describe renewal in the New Testament. Really, all the words are similar in form. They all mean to make new, to renew, or to restore. They are all associated with the work of the Holy Spirit, and we'll touch on this in the subsequent weeks together. We'll look more in depth at what that renewal is and how we can access it in our lives. But it describes this new way of life that we can enjoy. And they're all used in passages that talk about transformation or regeneration, this new birth that we can experience as those who are believers. For example, Romans 12:2, we just talked about that a few months ago, where he says, "Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed," and there's the word, transformed by the renewal of your mind. These two concepts go hand in hand, as they do in chapter 3, and we'll get there in a moment. But it indicates that the quality of a person's life is changing for the better. And it's changed from the inside out, as God is making you a new and better, stronger person on the inside, and it begins to show up on the outside. Notice, it all happens in spite of the obstacles. In verse 17, chapter 4, verse 17 says this, "For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." So it is not only an inward change, but it leads to glory in some way. And that's point number 2. It's renewal that leads to glory. This isn't just some throwaway renewal. This isn't just some disposable renewal. This isn't some empty kind of promise that you can shelve and disregard. It is significant renewal. And Paul wants to up the ante for us by using some Greek words here that are absolutely supercharged. He compares the renewal and the results of this renewal that we have with the light, momentary affliction. He uses those 3 words, light, momentary affliction. And he compares it with the eternal weight and glory. He wants you to see there is some significant contrast going on here. That which is eternal, never-ending glory that goes on and on. Something that will never diminish or fade. Our earthly delights and pleasures are petty, trivial, and embarrassingly irrelevant. But it doesn't have to be. Because we can trade in our earthly pleasures with the eternal weight of glory. That is what we have access to day by day. Unreal. Weight that he uses here, it is the high point on the scale. It essentially, you have maxed it out. The pin, the needle has been pegged. You can't get any further because there's no more measurement beyond. And so what Paul is doing, and we may not be able to really experience or appreciate what he's saying here, but weight in the New Testament is meant to help point us to kavod, which is the word for holy in the Old Testament, which talks about the weightiness and the immeasurability of God. The weightiness of God. And so he's providing a correlation for us to that. And then glory. When you think of everything that describes God, that is what glory means. When you think of his authority, you think of his sovereignty, you think of his power, you think of his greatness, and everything that we long for in this world, but is only found in God. That's what glory means. And then beyond all comparison, and there are 4 Greek words that are kind of strung together, but one of those Greek words is the word from which we get hyperbole. Basically, it is from extraordinary to extraordinary, or from infinity to beyond. That's what we're talking about here. That's, I think, where they originated this phrase. To infinity and beyond comes from right here. You heard it from me. I'm kidding. But when you think and you exaggerate in your mind, you imagine the greatest and the best possibilities. It is hyperbole in your mind. You think, there is no way this could possibly happen. Paul says, you've only begun to imagine the possibilities of the kind of glory that God has in store for you. And that's what it's available to us through the renewal that Paul is talking about in these verses. But who can experience this renewal? Who can experience this? Who needs renewal? Now, briefly, I want to just mention 3 different groups. And we'll build on this next week and the following week. But renewal first comes to those who are spiritually mature. And Paul is the one who is speaking about renewal, and he's speaking about it for himself. He puts himself in the equation. He writes himself into this text when he uses these personal pronouns. In verse 16, we do not lose heart. Our inner self is being renewed day by day. And then in verse 17, for this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory. You see, the secret to Paul's ministry success was renewal. Although he was beaten down, although his adversaries sought to destroy him, although he faced more and more hardship wherever he went, although all of this opposition faced him from day to day, it didn't make him weaker. It actually made him stronger. How do I know that? Because he says that in verse 17. He says, for this light momentary affliction is doing what? It's preparing for us glory. It has the opposite effect. It is doing the opposite, the reverse of what the opponents have sought to accomplish. It is, instead of creating weakness in me, is actually creating strength, and not strength on myself. Because that outer man is perishing, but the inner man is being renewed, strengthened, refurbished every single day. It comes to those who are spiritually mature. But it also comes to those who are spiritually weak. Throughout this letter, Paul addresses this church at Corinth. And if you know anything about the church of Corinth, I don't know how in the world you could call them a church. And yet, the Apostle Paul, in confidence, is able to bolster his faith in the fact that God has accomplished a work in them in spite of all of the negativity that he sees. He sees this church that is so dysfunctional, so unhealthy, so self-absorbed, but to whom renewal is available. The renewal that is enjoyed by extension through the Apostle Paul's ministry. Look with me at verses 11 and 12. It says this, for we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. We're being beaten down. From a physical standpoint, life is as hard as could be. We have given ourselves over to death for the sake of renewal and life in you. That's how Paul sees his ministry, a ministry by extension of renewal. But it's also available to every believer. And so if we reach a little deeper into the text, we can see in chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, this renewal really taking shape. It says this, for what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Christ Jesus as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And that is renewal. Light shining, rebirth, regeneration, the new life that comes because of an awakening of the heart and the eyes to see spiritual truths that are otherwise distant and hidden and veiled from those who desire to know the truth. But an awakening. Titus chapter 3, verse 5 says and describes this a bit when Paul says to Titus, he saved us not because of works done in righteousness, but according to his own mercy by, and here it is, the washing of regeneration and renewal of the Holy Ghost. This awakening of heart and life, this rebirth that happens through the power of the Spirit, making us alive. But it also needs to come to the spiritually blind. That's our third group. Paul's desire, his mission in life, is to make the radiance of the gospel clear to a lost and broken world. Those who need spiritual light, those who need renewal and awakening, as all of us in this room at one point in time, until God shined the light in our hearts and led us to a real birth, a spiritual birth, and a spiritual awakening. Paul says in chapter 4, verse 1, therefore, having this ministry, by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart. They didn't have to lose heart because the success of the ministry to this dead people, this blind people, was not anchored in the skill or the ability of the Apostle Paul to produce results. It was anchored in the Spirit of God to be able to accomplish what Paul and his team never could. renewal, spiritual awakening for the spiritually blind. But that leads us to another question. Why is this renewal so important? Why does God do it this way? And why would anyone want it? What does it do for me? Well, there are some physical reasons why renewal is important, and there are also some spiritual reasons why this renewal is important. Notice with me back at chapter 4, verse 16. Notice how Paul describes the conditions of renewal. He says, we do not lose heart. And then in chapter 4:1, he has said it again. He says, therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart. This word, to lose heart, is to become discouraged, to give up, to want to let it all go, to walk away. You ever feel that in your own life, this desire, this depletion of encouragement? You feel weary in life and you just want to give up because your batteries have run out. There's no more gas in the tank. There's no more life to be expended. There's nothing more to give. And that's what can happen and will happen for any person in this room who's operating on their own strength rather than tapping into the life source, the source of God's strength. We feel like run down. We often feel empty. We often feel drained of energy or stamina. And that's just the physical nature of how God built us. And so did Paul. Paul knew, though, that he could run to the well for strength and power and refreshment. And so he did so on a daily basis. He came face to face with his own limitations. We see in verse 7, chapter 4, verse 7, he talks about this limitation that he experiences. He says, we have this treasure in jars of clay. He uses that analogy to help you come face to face with how fragile your life is, how superficial your life can be, how temporal things really are. Paul understood that, but he goes on. He says, God has done it this way. We have treasure in jars of clay so that the surpassing greatness belongs to God and not to us. God allowed limitation that we experience to accentuate his divine power. So don't resent the weakness. Don't throw up your hands and be angry that you are depleted. Don't be frustrated at how run down things seem to be. God has built it that way so that you will run to the well, run to the source of power and strength and wisdom and help. He has done that to accentuate the gospel's radiance in your life. Oh, how I bristle at weakness. You find yourself there? You say, God, I am so empty right now. How in the world am I going to take ministry to that person another day? God says, remember, Andrew, I've done this by design so that you understand where the power really comes from. It doesn't come from you. It comes from me. I want you to get connected to the life source again. He does it for physical reasons. There are also some spiritual reasons why this happens. The task that we have been called to undertake is not only impossible from a human standpoint, it is fraught with opposition, both physical and supernatural opposition, that Paul brings up repeatedly throughout this letter and then also in chapter 3 and chapter 4. Like in verse 8, chapter 4, verse 8. See what he's talking about here, where he talks about brokenness in his life and the opposition that he faces. He says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. When the pressure comes, and there is resilience and strength that happens, and the world looks at you from the outside and they wonder, how in the world is this possible? They say and they arrive at the only conclusion, and it is that God must have provided the strength. It magnifies the gospel in your life when hard things happen. And when crushed, and when perplexed, and when persecuted, you are not destroyed. But God strengthens you in the process and carries you and actually makes you stronger for the next day. But we see another opposition in chapter 4, verse 3. It says, even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ. Not only is the mission hard enough and the opposition is great from adversaries that Paul is experiencing on a physical level, but he's facing opposition at a supernatural level too. And if it were not for the Holy Spirit's power in intervening and overcoming the blinding nature of Satan's power in the gospel, he would have no hope. Paul has anchored his heart and soul. His hope is anchored in the power of God to overcome this opposition that he experienced. Why do you need renewal? Because the mission is so great, you cannot do it on your own. It's impossible. So how does this renewal happen? How does it happen? I want you to see three things here. First, it begins with a vision of the glory of God. It begins with a vision of the glory of God. And I just want to give you a homework assignment this next week as a family. I want you to read chapter 3 and chapter 4, and I just challenge you to underline all the times that the Apostle Paul points to glory. It is unbelievable. There's like 16 times in these two chapters where the glory of God comes front and center, because glory is where it begins. And a taste and a vision for the glory of God is where it all begins, where renewal really begins in your life. A vision for God's glory is at the beginning, middle, and end of the Christian life. And you see this through these two chapters. It's what gets things going. It's what drives renewal from day to day. And it's what the finished product will finally be. In chapter 4, verse 6, God has shone into our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. That's the initial work of seeing glory. That is the first birth or regenerating work of God to make you a believer. And it all concludes, the sanctifying work is found in chapter 3, verse 18, where he says, and we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. That is sanctification. And then in chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, speak about the final destination, this eternal weight of glory that's being prepared for us in heaven. We could chart a course, and I could show you through the Old Testament and the New Testament how glory is magnified. The glory of God is brought front and center in our attention. Certainly it was true of the life of Moses, which we see the snapshot of glory there in chapter 3. I think it begins in verse 7 and runs all the way down to the end of the chapter. Moses was gripped by the glory of God. And in Exodus chapter 33 and 34, he gets to taste it. He's seen it in the burning bush, but he really gets to experience it. He longs for glory. He says, God, show me your glory. There he is up there on the mountain for 40 days, and he's not had enough. He wants more of God. He says, show me your glory. And so God says, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to open up the veil a little bit. I'm going to let you see my glory. I'm going to speak my name to you. My presence will be with you, the presence of God and the name of God. And then Moses comes down, and his face is all aglow. The glory shines. But I want you to understand it was not Moses' glory. It was God's glory. Make no mistake. The glory that is given to you is neither from you nor for you. It is for God and for the refreshment of the people that God has put you in touch with. It is from the Holy Spirit, the refreshment and renewal. It comes from Him and is for primarily the benefit of the people in your circles so that they can see God. Now, you get to enjoy some of the fringe benefits, but the glory is not for you. It is coupled with this, the strengthening hand of the Holy Spirit, the indwelling Spirit of God. And we could go to verse after verse, and we'll do this next week to begin to see and develop how this comes, how this strengthening process happens for us. How does the Holy Spirit move us from where we are into ever-transforming glory, from one degree of glory to the next? We're going to come back next week. We'll begin to unpack that a little bit so that you can understand what all that means. But it is what God desires to accomplish for you in renewal. And finally, it happens as we are transformed into the likeness of God. It happens as we're transformed into the likeness of God. God's glory put on display, this initial work of vision and tasting and seeing the glory of God that awakens your heart. The light shines into your life. Christ said, let light shine out of darkness, and we see the light of God, the glory, the face of the glory of God. And it awakens our heart and calls us to rebirth. And then the transformation process begins. As the heat and the light of God's presence begin to burn away and evaporate the corruption that's in our life. It's kind of like what's happening in 1 Peter, where the heat that is experienced there burns away the dross and purifies the gold. That's the kind of life we're talking about. As we're exposed to the presence of God, He begins to burn away that corruption in us so that the image of Christ might be more and more visible. And when that happens, the world around you sees the glory, not of you, but the glory of God. Now, they can react one of two ways. And the people of Israel in chapter 3, their first response, for some reason, is to say, Moses, go hide yourself. But for those to whom God is creating an awakening, the glory that people see in you will attract them to the radiance of Christ, so they can also experience that radiance for themselves. It's so encouraging to know that this renewal is possible and this renewal is accessible. That you don't have to exist on yesterday's energy. You don't have to exist on the last 10 minutes of breath and hope that it's going to sustain you for the next 10 minutes. You don't have to exist on the last 30 days of food and hope that's going to carry you the rest of this year. That you can come to the filling station every single day and find renewal. That's the way God has designed it. That's what we were made for. We were made for renewal so that the inner strengthening of the glory of God might be more and more visible and affect the world around us in every way. So, how might we develop this definition. What might we say? This is a working definition, by the way, so this is not concrete. We're going to continue to develop this as we go. But here's my first stab at putting all these pieces together. And it's still missing several elements. But how would we define renewal? I would say it's a spiritual awakening that makes visible the glory of Christ by outshining the brokenness of our inner self. And you can access it every single day. And it is meant to send shockwaves and ripple effects into the entire community, the world in which you live. May God create a spiritual awakening in us today and throughout this year. Let's pray.